Hey, have you seen the show about the badass silent stoic main character who's a loner and an outcast, takes on dangerous jobs, has a tragic backstory, and just wants to get paid and be left alone, but he gets involved in greater schemes and ends up having to care for a young child? Yeah, I like The Witcher too. Okay, so all joking aside, I find it funny how we get two high-profile shows with some of the same themes and structure so close together. Both The Witcher and The Mandalorian have stoic loners who get caught up in bigger things as their protagonists, both have some Monster of the Week format going on, both just want to work and get paid, both are from pulpy genres, high fantasy and space opera / western, and both have titles that pretty much sum up our hero's lifestyle / identity. The Witcher Witches and The Mandalorian Mandalores. But while I did enjoy The Mandalorian, I have to say I like The Witcher significantly more, and not just because I'm more of a fantasy nerd than a space western nerd, but because The Witcher Lorian does more with its main character, Geralt. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to point out that A, I haven't read the Witcher books yet, B, nor have I played the games except for the first one, which is a pretty fun and immersive experience if you can get over some Mount Everest-sized shortcomings. I mean, it's an awesome idea to pitch the Arthurian Lady of the Lake against Lovecraft's Dagon, I just wish I didn't have to get through 30 plus hours of this to get there. So what makes Geralt more interesting than Mando? Number 1, the company you keep. The Witcher gets more out of its side characters, often forcing Geralt to interact with strong, interesting, or at the very least amusing personalities. There's a clear straight man funny man thing going on with him and Jaskier that highlights both personalities through contrast, with the former being a moody, antisocial grouch, and the latter a theatrical over-the-top hedonist. Geralt and Yennefer are both stubborn, cynical, and quite powerful in their own ways, but whereas Yenny from the block is still trying to fulfill her desire for power, influence, and reversing the effects of her transformation, Geralt seems to have given up on anything more ambitious than hookers and ale. He warns the sorceress of the futility of people like them having a child, and he doesn't seem to have much drive to try to change the world in any significant way, aside from the occasional monster slaying. Geralt's interaction with Renfri shows how he's more about moving on and not causing trouble, instead of clinging on to past grievances. While the Mandalorian also meets colorful characters along the way, they never really get more out of him than I care for the innocent and I need credits. Mando meets Quill and their interactions reveal that Mando sucks at horse riding. Mando meets Cara Dune and we learn that he can work with other badasses, I guess. Mando has to team up with an annoying prick whose name I can't even be bothered to look up, and that tells us that he's an experienced badass, which will come as a shock if this is the first episode you watch. I guess they too could be considered a straight man funny man act, but I just never found their antics as amusing as Geralt's and Jeskalions.
It's onion.
Oh, and running into a droid tells us that he hates droids. For some reason. I'm sure we'll find out later. It's not that these characters are bad, except for this douche. Rather that they don't really help with exploring not Boba Fett's personality. Speaking of which, number 2, getting to know you. While the dynamic personalities contrasting or clashing with Geralt's is quite engaging, even when alone, The Witcher still reveals more aspects of its main character. We see how much he cares for his horse Roach, even talking to her, regaling her with the story of his first kill, which is both hilarious and quite sad.
That's sad.
And when Renfri points this out to him, you can almost feel the embarrassment, like he just got caught singing along with one of his favorite tunes.
Toss a coin.
He also likes whores. Okay, not the most unique or nuanced trait for a character to have, but actually, it is. See, the brooding loner badass is often way too cool for school to pursue sex, let alone a relationship, so they just completely ignore something that is a part of most people's lives. It simply humanizes him, showing that, yeah, dude likes to fuck. Especially if the first game is anything to go by. Ugh. Geralt also happens to have a sense of humor.
It's onion.
A kinda dry and bleak sense of humor, but a sense of humor nonetheless. He's definitely no comedian, but he's far from the humorless slab of meat most people judge him to be on first meeting. Couple this with his sardonic disdain for bullshit, whether it be from wizards or nobles, and him trying to avoid killing whenever possible, and you get a clear outline of his personality. Someone who is quite fed up with the machinations of the powerful at the expense of the helpless and the innocent. Mando Pascal, by contrast, never reveals more about himself other than the previously mentioned desire for credits and having a soft spot for kids. Sense of humor? Not really. Interests? Hobbies? Being a Mandalorian and helping other Mandalorians? Views on the world he inhabits? The innocent should be protected? Any flaws or shortcomings? I guess he's slow to trust? Maybe? Kinda? Again, this is a perfectly fine character to have, it just kinda falls flat when, aside from his rather generic backstory, you know just as much about him in the last episode as you did in the first. Speaking of backstory, Number 3. Journey to the Past. Among the many similarities these two share, backstory is also one of them. Geralt, without spoiling anything major, was sent to Witcher school at a young age, which includes grueling training, harsh circumstances, and at the end, a dangerous procedure that mutates one to be immune to all diseases, be able to use magic signs, but most importantly, have an increased libido and be unable to sire children. Sounds like Kaer Morhen is also a great place to train gigolos and porn stars. Needless to say, this all happened pretty much against Geralt's will. The Mandalorian story is quite similar. His family got killed and he got adopted by the Mandalorians, which included grueling training, harsh circumstances, and at the end, you have to wear a bucket on your head at all times. Tough luck. The major difference between these two backstories comes from how the world treats them because of them. And again, the white-haired wonder comes up winning. Witchers are almost universally feared and despised, or at the very least treated with great superstition, shown by common misconceptions such as them being non-human monsters themselves or having no emotions. Even their occupation is troublesome since it goes against their code to slay monsters without payment, and thus some see them as opportunistic scumbags trying to take advantage of those in need, when in reality it's more a case of, I might have a bitchin' immune system, but sadly, starvation is not a disease. So Witchers have to deal with fear, prejudice, and general hostility on a regular basis, even from people they're trying to help. But Geralt endures all of it even when he could easily ignore anyone who looks at him funny, which in turn makes him more sympathetic, since he comes off as the bigger man, in more ways than one, by not letting petty slurs and insults get the better of him. Contrast this with the Mandalorian's general reception, and it can be pretty much summed up as, cool. Mandalorians aren't particularly hated or despised, and any fear they might elicit simply comes from their combat prowess, rather than any unfounded superstitious misconceptions. Sure, his clan has fallen on hard times, living underground and having only one blacksmith to forge that Beskar slab into an elite Mandalorian armor plus 10, but compared to a Witcher's everyday life, being a Mandalorian kinda comes off as a walk in the park. The world doesn't really react in any drastic way to the appearance of a Mandalorian, and because of that, we don't get to see how one would adapt to such situations or circumstances, and because of that, we miss another opportunity to learn something interesting about our protagonist. So in conclusion, while these two characters are incredibly similar, it's fascinating to see how one property takes full advantage of its world and setting to flesh one out, while the other keeps it more on the down low, thus making its protagonist a bit more vague. But in any case, I shouldn't be too hard on Buckethead, since The Witcher has an entire book series to draw from, whereas the Mandalorian was made to prove to the world that, yes, a Star Wars story can be told without tying it to the original trilogy. I mean, video games have been doing it for decades, but hopefully the movie industry will one day catch up. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to... and...
Fuck.